Hi, everyone. It's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new here. So, today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I've been asked for a long time if I can do a bit of a video roundup regarding our weekly Pool Aid newsletter. So, if you're not subscribed, the newsletter goes out every Friday. It has for the last year and a half. We're now moving the newsletter to Wednesdays. So today I'll be talking about the Friday, September 5th newsletter. And then coming up this week, we're going to have another newsletter coming out on Wednesday, September 17th. I'll put a link in the description box below if you'd like to subscribe. But I'm also going to start trying to do these brief YouTube live videos to talk about the newsletter. A lot of people have told me they don't have space in their inbox, they don't have time to go through a detailed newsletter. So I'm going to be spending a few minutes talking about some of my favorite stories from the last newsletter. Hopefully, this is something you can listen to while you're catching up on admin, and then you can go back and look at specific articles in the newsletter. What is in the newsletter? So the newsletter basically started back in early 2024 when here in Canada, we were starting to really be constricted by Bill C-18, which prohibits us from putting any newspaper article, magazine article, any professional publication, journalism content. We in Canada are not allowed to reshare it on Meta products like Facebook, Instagram, sometimes even via WhatsApp, there can be issues. So I do a lot of reading in my role as an aquatic consultant. I spend every day reading different news articles from Google News Alerts, from journals, from trade publications. And a lot of people come to me asking about different stories or anything I've heard in the industry in terms of trends. I used to share all of that on the Lakeview Aquatic Consultants Facebook page, but no more. And so that is the main reason for the newsletter. I know not everybody has time or space for a newsletter, but it is a real passion that I spend a few hours each week pulling in the latest news stories, whether it be a lawsuit, a new facility, a particular story. It's something I'm really passionate about. So I'm hoping that we can reach a wider audience by doing these brief live videos. I don't have the capacity to be doing a heavily produced, heavily edited video about the newsletter each week. I wouldn't be able to keep up and get it out on time. This is already the second recording about our September 5th newsletter because the first one didn't work out. The audio didn't record. So here we are. I hope to make this a regular segment. Let's get into it. So on September 5th, the main part of the newsletter was every newsletter starts out with a bit of an op-ed or a lead story or something that I've been learning about. So in this particular case, I was learning about, in this particular instance, I was starting the newsletter off with an update on the Emily Kaiser drowning. So in case you missed it, we've mentioned it a few times in different articles over the last few months, but early in May of 2025, Emily Kaiser, she is an influencer living in Arizona. She is a mom content creator. Her son Trig drowned in their backyard swimming pool. He was discovered submerged. He was taken to hospital where, as best as we know from publicly available information, he had morbidity, he had complications from that submersion in water, and he was taken off of life support and he died. The mom has not been on social media for the last 3 months. She has gone completely cold turkey silent. And right before the Labor Day long weekend, her PR team assisted her, I can only presume, with coming out with this statement that she made on her Instagram posts. She made an Instagram post. I mention this because it is an ongoing part of our water safety and drowning prevention conversation. I'm not here to comment on the substance of the statement. I'm not here to comment on what happened. There's already a litany of people piling on online who are making her life very, very difficult when that family should be left to grieve. But I do think it is significant to mention this statement. I've included a small portion directly in the email where she states, I take full accountability as Trig's mother, and I know I should have done more to protect him. One of the hardest lessons I carry is that a permanent pool fence could have saved his life, and it's something I will never overlook again. I hope amidst this pain, Trig's story will help other children and families from suffering the same loss. So I thought it was very significant that she addressed the elephant in the room, which was that you could go back on her social media profiles, both on Instagram and TikTok. I was able to go back and see video content where the swimming pool, the in-ground swimming pool, did not have a fence. It did not necessarily always have a cover in place. And I'm not going to speculate why that is. She's not an individual I followed prior to this incident, and she is due some grace in terms of continuing to live a private life after this tragedy. But I do think this story is possibly an appropriate entry into water safety and drowning prevention discussions in terms of water cooler conversation that may come up in your workplace, in your sphere of influence. So we're going to try and avoid going forward adding too much to this story. It's pretty well done, but I did think it was significant that she made this statement and took some accountability for her role, even though she was not even on site when her child drowned. It appears that she had gone to dinner with some friends and that her husband, the dad, was at home with the children, Trig, her older child, and then her newborn. The rest of the newsletter goes on to include a variety of different articles. I do my best to try and span water safety, aquatic operations, science, litigation, but it really does depend on what's out there in the news. So, starting at the top, I shared an article regarding the risk of full faced snorkeling masks. This is one of those products that came out on the scene probably 5, 10 years ago, and it took the public by storm. People were showing up all over the place in public pools, in snorkeling environments with these full faced masks. And there doesn't seem to be a good sense of awareness of how dangerous they can actually be. And so that is the main article I shared here. It's a study specifically talking about how there is risk of buildup of gases in the mask that could contribute to drowning in younger children. The next article I shared in this newsletter was one that I came across on LinkedIn, and it speaks to people who love their jobs and how it impacts their quality of life and the lifestyle impact. This particular op-ed is focused on the summer camp industry, but a lot of the comments in terms of roles, organizational structure, financial models, all of that is equally applicable to aquatics. And so I would strongly encourage you, as we're in the last quarter, just approaching the last quarter of 2025, and you might be starting to think about your goals for this year and your accomplishments and things you want to do in 2026. This is a really refreshing take on the role of lifestyle impact when you love your job. I had an article from People magazine talking about, is it appropriate for kids to be changing on the pool deck? I shared an article from PewTag, which is the Pool Water Treatment Advisory Group out of the United Kingdom, talking about the increase in operating costs based on increased utility costs, i.e. gas costs in the UK because of the cost of gas and the war in Ukraine impacting utilities. So that has been an ongoing issue that I've covered across a variety of our newsletters. And I will be updating our website shortly where the newsletter landing page is to make it easier to search for specific topics in past newsletters. That has been something that's been requested for a while, and my newsletter provider has recently made some upgrades that should make it easier for me to make that design change. I also shared an article about lifeguards practicing patient care transfers with EMTs in the community. I really love this idea, and I wish more organizations did this on an annual or semi-annual basis. I shared an article about how the state of New York is looking to ban residential daycares at homes, residences with swimming pools after there was this drowning in the Bronx, a suburb of New York City, where a child in a home-based daycare climbed into an above-ground pool. I shared an article about some of the consequences when it comes to the downside to adults only events. So, if you've been following our newsletter for a while, I've talked a lot about how facilities are not really capitalizing on the opportunity to do adult only programming, whether that's special events such as, maybe licensed having wine or music. I went to Bozeman Hot Springs a few months ago in Montana, and they had a live band on Thursday nights when I was there, which brought in a lot of interest. They also had a liquor license, so you could purchase drinks. And so there is a lot of different ways both nonprofit and for-profit aquatic facilities can look at doing adults only events. But this was one of the downsides at a dry park where maybe they didn't have enough security, maybe they didn't have enough policies in place about their alcohol sales. And so now they've canceled all of their adults only events because it is too much risk and liability. I shared an article where somebody was asking, is it appropriate for them to refuse to visit their in-laws with their child because they don't have a backyard pool fence? I shared an article about Princess Charlene of Monaco, who some of you might recall was an Olympic swimmer from South Africa during her working career. And she talks about a personal tragedy that led to her own advocacy for water safety and drowning prevention. I do like to share some fun articles. So this next one included a piece about Martha Stewart. She is developing an outdoor swimming pool on one of her properties, and it looks like it's going to be absolutely spectacular the way it's set on the edge of a cliff with a beautiful view, natural stone. So I'm excited to see what that will look like when the project is complete. I also have a passion for talking about water safety and drowning prevention in the workplace when it's not specifically an aquatic facility. So I was shocked a few years ago to discover that there is a lot of workplace drowning fatalities still here in Canada, including Alberta. Some of the ones that have happened in Alberta over the last few years include somebody who was mowing grass. That mower flipped over into, it was on a golf course, it flipped over into water. Another one was a dog walker who broke through ice on the frozen river here in Calgary. And then more recently, there has been another heavy industry drowning at a fracking pond. And that particular company was charged in the death of one of their contractors. And it's really something we don't think enough about. I also shared a horrific video I saw somebody shared with me of some other heavy equipment that broke through basically the edge of the beach into the water. And thankfully, the driver was able to escape. Shared a couple articles about different ages in the workplace in terms of behavior, how young workers chatting, older colleagues may find that disturbing and annoying, but it's not just about preference in the workplace now, talking about individual employee rights. Shared an article about racism in American pools, a more comprehensive audio piece about the history. Shared an article about sweat bathing coming out of New York City, which was really, really interesting. Sometimes we see these big trends go to the big cities like New York, London, England, before they percolate down to the rest of us in smaller communities. I shared an article about a landfill that's going to be converted into a whitewater park. Whitewater, surf gardens, wave gardens, all of those are very, very interesting segment of our industry. The estimates are that those features are going to dramatically take over land. Development is leapfrogging over the next 5-10 years. So as much as I don't personally have an interest in surfing inland, I do see where they are a huge growing segment of our industry. Then I shared an article about a regular swimmer at Sunnyside Pool, which is a famous outdoor pool in the beaches area of Toronto. If you've never been and you live in Toronto, it is a spectacular, iconic pool. I shared an article about triplets, one triplet who drowned over a year ago who finally came home. And so this is where we could have a whole newsletter discussing the terminology of drowning, submersion, fatal, non-fatal, with morbidity. And often we don't talk about survival with morbidity, i.e., people living with complications. And so this was, I think, a very realistic story of the consequences that a child faced from submersion in terms of an anoxic brain injury that impacts their quality of life and their ability to do activities of daily living. I shared an article about social media in terms of how it's working in Australia to potentially curb drowning rates. Excuse me. I shared a really cool feature about plus sized or older, average sized women normalizing their fashion in bathing suits. Often in media, we only see skinny, white, very stereotypically beautiful people showcased in bathing suits. And so I thought this was a really great feature to get to know these women who are perfectly comfortable in their bodies and what they're wearing as regulars at the pool. And then the last couple articles I shared, one was regarding Glenwood Hot Springs in Colorado, a really nice feature that actually takes you through the system in a lot more detail than we normally see. Colorado is one of the few states in the US that does allow flow through hot springs. So any opportunity to hear about how these pool systems work is genuinely really interesting to me. I also shared an article about a Nigerian swim coach who works with children with disabilities, including blindness, as well as a study on surveillance detection in a lab setting between lifeguards and non-lifeguards. I also learned this week that Splash Pad is a registered trade name from Vortex, which is a Quebec-based company that builds splash pads, spray parks, water play features. And so it's kind of like Kleenex. A lot of us are used to saying Kleenex. We know what it means when we say Kleenex, even though it may not be Kleenex brand facial tissue that we actually have in our home. I closed out the newsletter on September 5th with a video where I interviewed the guys from Steadfast Safety about their new lifeguard tube. This was a product I had an opportunity to see at Stargard Elite's camp back in January 2025, and I was thrilled, even as someone who's not an avid tube user as a lifeguard. This is Ava Foam. This is a high quality product that I really think is going to take the aquatic industry and lifeguard industry by storm. It's a game changer compared to those foam tubes that break apart, that crack, that rot. So take a look at this video where they talk about the design process of the tube. And then coming up in the next few months, I'm actually going to have some demo videos using that tube in the water with victims. So that is it for our September 5th newsletter. Let me know if you have any questions, comments. Do any particular topics resonate with you? I'm going to be back later this week with an update regarding our September 17th newsletter. These will be coming out a few days after the newsletter, so people have the opportunity to peruse it for themselves, or you can listen in to this live feed on YouTube and then go back and pick out any specific articles. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll catch you in the next video.